Hi. So as people are trickling in, I just want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you. This is the latest episode of All Tech as Humans webinar series, where we engage in conversations with the responsible tech leaders to discuss some of the world's thorniest tech and society issues. So I'm your host, Executive Director of All Tech is Human, Rebekah Tweed. So for those who aren't familiar, All Tech is Human is a responsible tech nonprofit. We bring together a global community, and we've built the world's largest network in responsible tech with over 50,000 people around the world, all united around a shared mission of better aligning technology with our shared human public interest. So you can find out more about how to get involved in our work at alltechashuman.org. You'll see all of our different activities across our three work streams: collaborative community building, education and resource development, and responsible tech career development. So I want to thank everybody for joining us as you are coming in. Would love to encourage you to share a little about yourselves in the chat. So please tell us where you're tuning in from. If you've gotten the book yet, let us know what you're thinking about it. And if you have any questions for our guest at any point, please drop those into the Q&A function so that we can see it, because questions can get lost in the chat. So we will choose a couple of those to bring in toward the end. Okay, so I'm very excited about today's conversation. It is part of our series of this month in responsible AI. It is also part of our responsible tech author series. So we are thrilled to be joined today by the award-winning AI reporter, Karen Hao. She is at the start of a whirlwind book tour, and we are so thrilled she's given some time to us here at All Tech is Human. Karen Hao is an award-winning journalist covering the impacts of artificial intelligence on society. She writes for publications including The Atlantic and leads the Pulitzer Center's AI Spotlight series, a program training thousands of journalists around the world on how to cover AI. She was formerly a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, covering American and Chinese tech companies, and a senior editor for AI at MIT Technology Review. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. And thank you to everyone to being here ahead of a long weekend for some of you.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. Okay, so your new book, Empire of AI, which just came out on Tuesday, it's getting a lot of attention and for very good reason. You've been in the trenches reporting on OpenAI and Sam Altman, amassing material for this book for 7 years. So what made you want to write this book? Why did you think this particular story needed to be told?
Yeah, I think I was really lucky in that I started covering AI and OpenAI before the world had its ChatGPT moment. And so I was able to really learn the technology, read the research, grasp it, and develop opinions of my own about it before the space got really, really noisy. And when that ChatGPT moment happened, I felt like the discourse around AI was starting to collapse. There had been a lot of really rich AI discourse that was happening before that moment where people were really highlighting how there are benefits to this technology, but only when we develop it in the right ways and only when we deploy it with certain types of conditions and guardrails. And then suddenly, all of that kind of went out the window as more people were introduced to the technology for the first time through this chatbot that OpenAI said is able to talk about anything and will eventually be able to do anything. And so I wanted to write the book to just add some context to that moment. Where did this technology come from? Who did this technology come from? Because it didn't fall from the sky. There are very specific ideologies imbued within it. It is also very much a product of certain money flows and power flows within our society. And ultimately, if we want to understand how AI is then going to affect all of us in the long run and want to correct the course of AI development, we also need all of that historical context as well. So that was the intent behind the book is just telling that story and shining a light on the fact that technology is not actually what many people think it is.
Yeah. So on one level, this is a story about Sam Altman, the man, the founder and the leader. And in many ways the conduit for this current AI arms race. I think some of the juiciest parts of the book that I think people will be eager to read about are your descriptions and breakdown of the blip, as it's known, about that brief firing and that masterful maneuvering and reinstatement of Altman, which you have, extensive inside info about with lots of receipts. Also, you go deep on the early days of OpenAI, so that like formation of the company, the relationship with Elon Musk, which I do want to ask you about later in our conversation. But I love how you weave so much together throughout this book. And I think what may be of particular interest to the All Tech is Human audience is how your telling of this story really taps into some important milestones in the history and evolution of responsible AI.
Mm,
You give this really compelling play-by-play on the details surrounding Timnit Gebru's firing from Google in November of 2020 and the significance of the stochastic parrots paper that she
mhm.
co-authored with Margaret Mitchell and lead author Emily Bender. And I believe you were the first to publish the work when it became the centerpiece of this dramatic unraveling of Google's ethical AI team at the end of 2020. So you really weave together and connect significant points along the way for responsible AI. And you draw this line from Timnit Gebru's impact to the work of Dr. Joy Buolamwini and the significance of the Gender Shades Project on,
Mhm.
pausing the sale of facial recognition tech by major tech companies for a time. But there's historically been this perception of divisions between people with that constellation of concerns about the immediate societal impacts of AI, the AI ethics crowd, as it's commonly referred to, and those worried about existential or alignment risks of super intelligent AI systems, and the AI safety crowd, or the doomers, who
Yes.
are, yes, more often pitted against this third group, the AI accelerationists or the boomers. And those are people pushing the technology forward as fast as they can. And you really detail those contrasts really well in the book. And so that's what I want to ask you about right now. Would love to know a little more about that. Can you talk about how that boomer doomer dynamic manifested itself at OpenAI?
Yeah, totally. So, one of the things that I kind of came to realize as I was reporting the book is, first of all, that there is the boomer doomer. I thought a lot of the boomer doomer language was rhetoric, and it was just meant to be a narrative that was wheeled out as needed from these companies. The thing I was shocked by most in my reporting was I realized these are actually deeply rooted belief systems, quasi-religious, maybe even fully religious belief systems that dictate a substantial amount of AI development today. And I have now started calling them the AGI religion because boomers and doomers are, I think, actually just two sects of the same religion. They're two sides of the same coin. They both believe in the fact that AGI is a thing, that it's well defined, that it's right around the corner, and that it's going to have civilizational transformation. And the boomers, of course, believe that it's going to be positive, utopic transformation. And the doomers think that if we don't think carefully, or if we build this technology at all, that is going to be devastating transformation and potentially kill all of humanity. But the conclusion from both of these narratives is, therefore, we need to be the ones that control this technology. And OpenAI um, has long had both of these sects within the company because it was founded by, who's Sam Altman and Elon Musk, who many people would consider now to be the face of the boomer movement and the doomer movement. And so those two things were part of the core DNA of the company for a long time, where the mythology was, we need to build the good AGI before someone else builds the bad AGI, and we are the ones with the scientific and moral clarity to do that, to usher in this utopia um, into the future. But the thing that I concluded after reporting my book, and the reason why I say that they're just two sides of the same coin, is that the acceleration that we see and the trajectory of AI development that we see today cannot be understood without understanding both forces having shaped it. Like the boomers and the doomers worked hand in hand. The boomers maybe very consciously, the doomers maybe inadvertently, but they worked hand in hand to scale these models to unprecedented size at unprecedented speeds, and um, with this idea that they had to, like, they must do this thing in order to ultimately protect humanity from hell and bring it to heaven. And so there, of course, among the sects themselves, they very much clash with one another, even though I say that they're two sides of the same coin, and they have these really dramatic clashes throughout the company's history, and of course culminate in one of the most dramatic clashes, which is the board crisis. The Boomer Jimmer clash was one of the things that fed into the board crisis. The other one being that Altman is also he has a very loose relationship with the truth. And so that also fed into the kind of combustion that happened during the board crisis. But um, yeah, just detailing all of those forces at play, I really wanted to illustrate this idea that technology is a product of human choices. Like I mean, and a product of not actually scientific or technical rationale, but that the current AI moment is really a product of these quasi-religious belief systems.
And the key metaphorical premise of the book is around this idea of empire. Um, so you point to elements like, resources like energy, water, labor. You tell the stories of some of the people who are impacted, communities that are impacted by data center energy usage, a community in Chile impacted by fresh water usage, and workers in Kenya whose labor doing data annotation is what these successively more and more powerful models are built on. Can you tell us a little more about that? About like some of the ways, tell us about some of the ways that communities are challenging the empire building.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I ended up highlighting stories from Chile and from Uruguay, which I'll focus. There are many different stories, but I guess I'll focus on this one because I was particularly heartened by the way that these communities were pushing back against empire. So both of these countries have a really, really long, centuries-long history of extraction, and the governments sort of have developed this mentality of their place in the world is to give their natural resources to higher geopolitical powers. So Chile has done a lot of positioning of itself in strategically and on the international stage as we have lithium, we have copper, we have water, we have land, we have power, like take it. And then that's their kind of way to participate in the global technology supply chain. And during my reporting, I ended up going to the communities who are actually the ones that own that land, that water, that power, the lithium, the copper, to talk to them about their experience of undergoing these so-called technological revolutions that are supposed to bring benefit to everyone. And one thing that's really interesting about Chile when it comes to data centers that are coming in to take fresh water resources, Chile it has it previously was under a dictatorship. And during that dictatorship, it privatized pretty much everything, including water. So it's unlike many other countries in the world where fresh water is considered, a human right that you have access to and is a public good. But in Chile, there's actually one community in particular that does have a public water resource, drinking water resource. They're just the only pocket in the country where the water is not privatized. And that community gets the water from the public resource. And then during emergency situations in Chile, they will take fresh water from those reservoirs to also wheel out to other communities. So it is a very highly precious resource. It's a life-sustaining resource. And that is exactly where Google and Microsoft and I think now Amazon decided to bring their data center to tap into that very specific freshwater resource. And this community that lives there, they didn't understand what AI was. They had not been technology activists, but they did understand they were water activists. They did understand how fiercely you need to fight to get rid of private interest, other types of interest into their water resources. And so when they found out it was first a Google data center that came in, they lit up and they started putting out pamphlets, petitions, knocking on every single one of their neighbors' doors, going to city council meetings, working with politicians to be like, why is this company using our fresh water? And at the time, Google had actually filed an environmental impact assessment where they said that they were going to use 1,000 times more water than the residents in that community. And they were like, no. And so they escalated through all of these protests, like grassroots on the ground protests, um, until the issue went from Google Chile to Google Mountain View to the Chilean government itself and forced the Chilean government and Google headquarters to actually come into a room and talk with these residents who, on the face of it would have the least amount of agency and the least amount of voice in this global hierarchy of power. But to then talk with them about if you were to even bring this data center, what are you giving us? Are you giving us jobs? Are you putting guarantees in place for not using more than X amount of water or more than X amount of energy? And until you actually have these conversations where there's some kind of mutual beneficial agreement struck, like you don't get to come here. And they were so successful that then there were other activists in other countries that started learning from their playbook. So I went to Uruguay to talk to an activist who there was a Google data center also coming in during a historic drought in Montevideo, which was so bad that the Montevideo government started mixing toxic chemical water into the drinking water supply, and that was causing women to have miscarriages because they were drinking chemicals. And during the middle of that, Google also announces, we're going to build a data center that uses your fresh water. And there was a professor and researcher activist person, Daniel Penna, who had read about the Chilean activists and then said, wait a minute, I know what I need to do. And he started suing the company and pushing back and engaging in a lot of the similar tactics that the Chilean activists did as well. And so those are some of the stories that I ended up putting in the book in part because there is a sense often one of the features of empire is that they're made to feel inevitable. And I talk with so many people around the world who are like, well, there's nothing we can do, so we're just going to give away all of our data and all of our resources, and it is what it is. But these people who you would think would have the least amount of agency actually demonstrated how much agency they really have to make change, to force these conversations, to actually clog up the data center development process to the point that the companies needed to respond. And I think we can all learn from that kind of spirit and heart and conviction and activism in all of our lives.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I thought it was especially interesting too when the response from the tech companies was to offer things that were irrelevant to the communities that they were taking resources from, offering to plant trees while they're taking water. And yeah, the work of the community to force the company to pay attention to their actual needs. Um, Okay, so now I want to focus a little bit on Sam Altman, the man. You really flesh this out in the book, his unique set of characteristics and traits. So they've enabled him to be very successful, obviously. But
Hmm.
I think it's important to understand his success through more than just his outcomes and
Hmm.
also look at his process. So I
Hmm.
would love to hear, can you tell us about some of the common complaints about him, what those tended to be across his various ventures and companies throughout the history of his successes?
Yeah. So Sam Altman is, I mean, the roots of his success is that he is an extraordinary storyteller. He is a once in a generation storytelling talent. That's why he's able to fundraise gobs and gobs of money. And that is why he's able to recruit a lot of talent to work on specific things that he dictates to them. He's also a phenomenal storyteller because of what I mentioned. He has a loose relationship with the truth. And so when he enters a room to talk with someone one on one, what comes out of his mouth is what the other person wants to hear, not what he believes himself or what is the ground truth of the matter. And when you're able to do that, I mean, that's such a powerful weapon. You can say whatever you need to say. And of course, like on top of that, he is very good at understanding what people want. Um, and so that, of course, the same roots of success then become the roots of a lot of frustration for people who work with him and around him. Um, and essentially, what I realized while I was reporting this, I mean, this was something that had been swimming in the water for a long time when I started, when I was working on the book, that like he has this loose relationship with the truth, which is something that's very hard to nail down because it's a characteristic of someone that is sort of an opinion. Like you ask someone, "Oh, is Sam a liar?" And then some people are like, "Yeah," and some people are like, "No." And it's really hard to get to the bottom of the matter. And so what I started doing was I would ask people in this particular moment in time, what did Sam tell you about what he believes and what he thought the company needed to do? And I asked this to every single person. And because I interviewed so many people at every stage of the company, I was able to suddenly see that no matter what era of the company, Altman would say something totally different depending on the person. And he would frame things based on like what he knew that person needed to hear. And so this is a common complaint among all of the people who have worked with him is that it causes a lot of mistrust among colleagues because when there are two teams that are disagreeing with each other, usually you would want the CEO to then state a specific direction, to be the referee, to take leadership and say, some people are not going to be happy about this decision, but we need to go this way. But what he would do instead is he would just say to one group, yes, I totally agree with you, and then say to the other group, yes, I totally agree with you. And then they would start fighting each other. And this was ultimately the dominant force actually that led to him being fired was there were that it had caused a significant level enough level of chaos at the company that senior leadership and the board became really, really worried that it was destabilizing the company and it would lead key talent to leave um, because they could no longer handle that kind of like um, lack of a shared source of information and shared certainty anymore about what they were even doing. And that was a complaint that he also had early in his career when he was working on his first startup that ultimately became a failure. The senior leadership also approached the board twice and tried to get him fired because it was the same thing. Like he keeps saying things that just have no basis in reality, and it's not allowing us to do the work. And the second thing that people often say is that it seems like the way that he shapes things and the way that he moves people towards certain goals, that it ultimately ends up being somewhat self-serving to him. And this is the thing that I had the hardest part pinning down is people really did not agree on whether he was explicitly self-serving or he just had uh, a lot of blind spots because he's a tech billionaire and doesn't really understand how other people live, and therefore he's going to do certain things with a certain conception of what is the right thing to do, and it ultimately still ends up being self-serving. Like, so I don't really fall one way or the other in the book. But it is another consistent complaint that the result, the outcome, is that people still feel like in the end, the person who wins, who is guaranteed to win in any scenario, is him.
Yes. I think you detail that so well throughout the different companies that Altman is involved with, and then of course ultimately, how that manifests itself in the blip. And then of course he wins and comes back and leads the company and is continuing to lead the company. And I think, you know, you don't touch on this as much, but I think it's really interesting the way you kind of contrast him with Musk.
Mhm.
I think it is an interesting aspect of the book, your description of their relationship and the tensions and ultimately that rivalry between the two of them. Can you give us some insights into, what you uncovered maybe as some of their key, or what some insights from your perspective? What are some of their key differences, and how did those manifest in the ways that they were leading their companies?
Yeah, so maybe I'll first talk a little bit about why Elon Musk hates Sam Altman so much now. And the reason is because Musk really feels like Altman used him. And this is a common theme among a lot of people, is that they feel like they were used somehow by Altman, and they can't quite articulate like how it happened, but the by the end of the process, they are left with that feeling. Um, and the reason is, so Altman was the one who first originally came up with this idea for an AI research lab. He wanted to do it as part of Y Combinator when he was there, and just spin it out as a YC project. But he recruited Musk by carefully cultivating a relationship with Musk, and saying to Musk many of the things that Musk really wanted to hear, which were, he was like, Altman also deeply shared Musk's concerns about the existential risks of AI. He also felt that AI being developed by Google was something that needed to was probably not going to lead to the best path. And he agreed with Musk that there needed to be a lot of regulation for AI. And so ultimately, Musk kind of gets roped into this idea of, oh, I like this guy, I like what he's saying. He's like me. Let's start this nonprofit together to be the anti-Google, to be a bastion of transparency and responsibility in AI research. And essentially, what happens then is OpenAI decides that they want to, a couple of years in, they want to chase the scaling paradigm. They want to go after the scaling paradigm, and therefore they need a lot of money, and therefore it cannot be a nonprofit anymore. So as they start discussing the fact that they will need to do some kind of for-profit conversion, whether convert the whole nonprofit into a for-profit, or some other version, which ultimately they landed on a for-profit nested in the nonprofit. Um, Musk and Altman could not agree on who should be CEO. Musk wanted to be CEO, Altman wanted to be CEO. And essentially, Altman does what he does, is extremely persuasive, and persuades Greg Brockman that he should be the guy. And then Greg Brockman persuades Ilya Sutskever that Altman should be the guy to be CEO. And once those two key leaders who were running most of the lab at the time um, choose Altman, Musk doesn't want to be part of the picture anymore. He doesn't want to be part of an organization where he's not an executive. And so he leaves. Um, of course, once OpenAI becomes extremely successful, then Musk feels extremely pissed off that he was, as he feels, outmaneuvered by Altman, that his name was somehow used to bolster OpenAI's reputation in the beginning, and then he was discarded once it was no longer of value to what OpenAI was doing anymore. And so the way that I contrast the two of them is that, like, Musk has a coercive power. He like forcefully tries to dominate situations. Obviously, we've seen a lot of evidence of this now in recent years in the way that he approaches situations. Whereas Altman he has a persuasive power. He doesn't coerce. No one ever feels like they were coerced into doing anything by him. They just feel like they're slowly lured into it because he sweet talks their way into it. And whereas Musk plays legal offense And he's, now he's suing OpenAI, has been suing OpenAI for a long time, and it's a thorn in OpenAI's side. Altman is one that plays legal defense. Like he nests his all of his structures, not just OpenAI structure, but all of the corporate structures or entities that he spins up in his life are very convoluted, nested things that try and obfuscate what's happening. It becomes really, really difficult. For me as a journalist, like I still do not understand OpenAI's very, very complicated structure because it's now not just a for-profit nested in a nonprofit. There's like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen entities that are all related to one another. And people within OpenAI have told me they have needed teams of lawyers to just pick apart like what their rights are as employees, so that's kind of like the difference between the two men. But one of the things that I hope that the book highlights is there can be a tendency to really fixate on their personalities, and Altman has really tried to lean into positioning himself as like the anti-Musk and, oh, this is a crazy rogue tech billionaire, but you want me, the nice guy. But they're actually, again, two sides of the same coin. Like they're actually all after the same thing with different tactics.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Yeah. Altman as this ultimate nice guy. Um, that yeah, that resonates. So another point that you make in the book that I think is really interesting, especially for the All Tech as Human audience, you you have a kind of a repeated theme about the need for transparency, data transparency for, accountability and a meaningful check against this empire building and redistribution of power. For instance, without the visibility that data transparency brings, we can't actually know the model's true capabilities, if they're potentially being trained or fine-tuned on testing data. And then when you look at the environmental impacts, we need transparency to be able to understand what those true impacts are. So can you talk a bit about the importance of data transparency and its the the way it is important for resisting empire building?
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about in my epilogue is there was this really great talk that one of my dear friends, who's also an AI researcher, Ria Kaluri, gave at Queer in AI at NeurIPS in 2019, I want to say. And she had this reframing of the question that people often ask of how do we ensure that AI does good? And she was like, this kind of framing is very nebulous because good is in the eye of the beholder. And really, the question we should ask is how do we build and deploy AI to shift power? So, how do we make sure that it's not fortifying the empire and it's actually dismantling the empire and bringing us back to democracy? And one of the ways that empires consolidate power is by monopolizing knowledge. They monopolize AI research production. Now, most AI research is done by researchers that are either working at or financially affiliated with these companies. And all of that research is actually filtered through what is good for the empire, and the things that are bad are deleted. That's part of the reason why I talk about Timnit Gebru's experience. Um, but the other thing that they monopolize in terms of knowledge is data. If they don't reveal to us the data, then we have no way of independently checking the claims that they make, either about the data or about the models. Because if they say, our models are now developing new capabilities where they're able to extrapolate from their training data to different realms that we didn't train them on, I mean, how are we supposed to know? We didn't actually get to examine the data. And half of the time, these companies don't examine the data because the data sets are too large, that they're using only automated methods to check what might be in the data. And and then like when they say, oh, we're not using any like copyrighted images, or we're not using, like, there was a study that Stanford researchers did where they discovered that Stable Diffusion, whose data set, one of their data sets is open source, actually contained child sexual abuse material in it. When a company says, no, we didn't do that, we have no way of knowing. And so transparency to me is a really, really, really key component of containing the empire, redistributing the ability to produce knowledge about these technologies, these data sets, and their limitations outside of the center of power, so that if there is actually something that makes the empire look bad, it actually gets out into the world. It's actually contributes to public discourse about how we need to think about these companies and what they're doing.
So, Karen, curious what is next? We have this very fast-moving field. OpenAI makes news constantly. They just acquired Apple's former design guru, Johnny Ive's design firm. You mentioned they have quite a few pending lawsuits, some of which are from Elon Musk. We have this restructuring into the public benefit corporation with some amount of nonprofit oversight. But curious what you're watching for in regards to the company, to Altman, to his various somewhat verticalized investments to AI. So just curious what you're looking for.
What I'm looking for is nothing to do with what the companies are doing. I'm looking for what people are doing in response to the companies. Like, I am very excited about the momentum that we are seeing with people waking up to that fact that this technology is something that they actually have a voice in and they actually need to push back on if they don't agree with how it's developed. The fact that there are, students and teachers that are starting to talk constantly about how do we actually use AI in education to make sure it benefits student learning rather than just completely erode away their critical thinking. The fact that there are all of these activists around the world that are pushing back against data centers and actually gaining ground against forcing these companies to give them a seat at the table. And I hope that like the what's next question is always one that's tricky because it sort of assumes that the trajectory of the future is happening and we're watching and there's some kind of predictive ability to say what's going to happen, but ultimately what happens next is up to us, right? And I hope that a huge reason why I wrote the book is I really want it to be a platform for movements all around the world, for collective action all around the world, for people to just remember that actually all of the resources that these companies need to build these technologies are actually resources that we own. This is our data. This is our land. This is our energy. And when we remember that and don't just cede this away, that's when we really start to contain the empire because then the empire can't function. They can't build their technologies anymore. They will have to shift to non-imperial forms of AI development. And so I really hope that as much as it can be really, really, really easy to be sort of nihilistic today and to feel really dark about certain things that are happening in our world, that this book helps and this talk helps you realize that there's actually so much space for change and we should take that step forward.
Incredible answer. Related from the audience, I'm going to take a couple of questions here before we let you go. An anonymous attendee says, what recommendations do you have for how people can get involved with raising awareness of the impacts of AI and increasing regulation of AI in the US?
That's a great question. I used to talk a lot about regulation and I stopped doing that because we are not in a very good environment right now for regulation. I mean, the fact that just past few days, the federal government has already stated its opinion. They're not going to regulate during the Trump administration. And then in the past few days, they tried to introduce a proposal into the Republican tax bill to ban state regulation of AI for the next 10 years as well. So I really don't think that we can wait on regulation. What we can do is, for example, like if you are a parent of a kid and your kid's school is currently trying to figure out whether to use AI or already using AI without even asking you, form a parent-teacher coalition. Have a conversation about it. Develop an AI guidelines policy for your school where you decide which tools you would want to buy, how you want to use them under what circumstance, and actually participate in the kind of governance of AI deployment in your specific context. Same within your workplace. When I'm sure every single company right now is like, what's our AI policy? What are we going to do? Form a group with your coworkers, have a discussion about that, draw out the conditions you want met in order for this to be done in a good way. And if that means, like the Hollywood writers, they went on strike, on a historic strike that lasted a really long time in order to get those guidelines into their contracts. If that means going on strike, do that. Like that is what this moment calls for. Um, and also, don't give your data to these companies. Like, I don't use ChatGPT, other than when I have to research its latest features so that I can write about it. I also, when I do, I create a fake email. Like I use fake data so that it's not actually getting any useful information from me to help continue these companies doing what they do. Um, you probably have a data center popping up around you. Go to the city council meeting. Start asking these questions. Um, yeah, so I think basically what I'm maybe the quick summary is like make noise. Make noise and be annoying about not allowing these technologies to just seamlessly bulldoze all of us over.
Yes, fantastic. And at All Tech is Human, you know, we take very seriously wanting to basically having a springboard for action to people to push back in these ways and providing resources that can be helpful to that end. And I want to give a shout out to Fast Forward. They have an AI policy tool for nonprofits, and I think it's probably very useful for being able to start with something like that, to be able to apply it to your own situation. Okay, one more question. We have about 3 minutes left with Karen, so I'm gonna pull one up here from another anonymous attendee. What is the answer to those who are concerned that the actors who might build the bad AGI are outside of our control? For example, should the US be concerned that China might reach AGI first? If so, what should our response be to that concern?
What I always say is you need to look at the track record of what about China has gotten us. It has not gotten us more democratic technologies. It has only gotten us more authoritarian technologies. We are at a point where I can't point to a single example of a US company doing democratic technology building. And that is because they successfully wielded the what about China, what about China, what about China, so that there's no guardrails whatsoever on their ability to use the data, on their ability to enter all of these communities without any transparency and put up these data centers. And so I mean, like, that tells you all you need to know about what we need to do differently. Like, instead of trying to continue to evoke an evil other, we need to just focus on making sure that what we have is democratic. And we sort of moved. There used to be an era where there was this belief that like if we show the strength of democracy, then that's naturally going to be the best argument. If you build amazing technologies that are really beneficial, like other people are going to adopt that model. We have lost that imagination where now it's all about a race to the bottom, but we need to remember actually, if we shore up the way that technology is developed in the US and actually turn it from an authoritarian development process to a democratic one, that we will then have a shining example of why everyone else should do that too.
Thanks, Karen. That does bring us to the end of our time together today. So thank you so much for joining me, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Karen, where can we pick up your book, Empire of AI?
You can go to empireofai.com and there's a bunch of order links there. Or you can go to your local bookstore. I've been really, really thrilled to see people send me photos of the book in their local bookstores, like all around the world. So when you do that, do snap a photo and like tag me on LinkedIn, tag me on Blue Sky, on Twitter if you still use it. And yeah, I would also love to hear from you. So my website is karendhow.com. When you go to empireofai.com, it also gives you the link to my other information.
Fantastic. Okay, and you can keep up with everything that All Tech is Human is doing at alltechishuman.org. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for everyone coming.